Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Working as an EMT in rural Montana taught me plenty about long, empty roads and the kind of darkness that swallows everything beyond your headlights. I was 28 that summer, 3 years into the job, partnered with a guy named Tom, who'd been doing this for nearly 2 decades. We covered a massive territory, hundreds of square miles of highway connecting small towns where everybody knew everybody, and the nearest backup could be 40 minutes away on a good night. That particular July evening in 2019, we'd just finished what Tom called a milk run. 12 hours of minor calls. Nothing serious. A kid with a broken arm from falling off his bike, an elderly woman with chest pains that turned out to be indigestion, and a fender bender with no injuries. We were heading back to base around 2 a.m., both of us fighting to stay alert after the adrenaline-free shift. The stretch of Highway 287 between Townsend and Helena is about as desolate as it gets. No streetlights, no houses for miles, just sagebrush and the occasional deer crossing sign. Tom was driving while I filled out the last of our paperwork, the ambulance's dashboard lights creating a small bubble of visibility in the overwhelming darkness. We'd made this drive hundreds of times before, knew every curve and dip in the road. The radio played quietly, some classic rock station that helped keep us awake. I remember thinking how peaceful everything seemed, how different from the chaos we usually dealt with. The engine hummed steadily, and I could hear Tom humming along to Hotel California under his breath, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel in rhythm. That's when we saw the car up ahead, maybe a quarter mile out. The hazard lights blinked in a steady rhythm, creating orange pulses against the black night. As we got closer, our headlights illuminated a dark blue sedan, one of those generic models you see everywhere but never really notice. The hood was propped open, and wisps of what looked like steam or smoke drifted up into the beam of our lights. Standard breakdown scenario, we'd seen it dozens of times before. Tom started slowing down without even discussing it. That's what we did out here. When someone needed help, you stopped. It was an unspoken rule of these isolated roads. Professional courtesy extended beyond just medical emergencies, when you were often the only vehicle someone might see for hours. Standing next to the car was a man, probably mid-30s, wearing jeans and a faded denim jacket despite the warm night. He had his back to us as we approached, seemingly focused on whatever was wrong under the hood. What struck me first was how still he was. Most people with car trouble are pacing around, checking their phones, looking anxious or frustrated. This guy just stood there, one hand resting on the raised hood, completely motionless. Tom pulled the ambulance onto the shoulder about 20 feet behind the sedan, leaving our emergency lights on to alert any other traffic that might come through. The rotating red and white lights painted strange shadows across the asphalt and the surrounding brush, making everything look like it was moving, even when it wasn't. I grabbed a flashlight from the console and we both climbed out, the sudden silence after killing the engine almost overwhelming after hours of road noise. "Hey there, need some help?" Tom called out as we walked toward the sedan, our boots crunching on the loose gravel along the shoulder. The man didn't turn around immediately, just kept staring into the engine compartment. When he finally did pivot to face us, it was with this slow, deliberate movement that made my skin prickle. His face was ordinary enough. Stubbled jaw, dark hair that needed a cut, eyes that caught our flashlight beams and reflected them back like a deer's. But there was something in his expression, or maybe the lack of expression, that made me unconsciously slow my pace. He didn't look relieved to see us, which was the typical reaction when help arrived on these lonely roads. He looked calculating, like he was trying to figure out what to do with us. "No," he said, and that was it. Just one word, flat and final. Tom and I exchanged a quick glance. In 3 years of stopping to help stranded motorists, I'd never had someone refuse assistance, especially not when they were clearly broken down in the middle of nowhere. "Tom, Always the more diplomatic one tried again. "You sure? We've got tools in the rig, could take a look at what's going on. Maybe it's something simple." The man shifted his weight slightly, and I noticed his hands for the first time. They were clean, too clean for someone who'd been working on an engine. No grease, no dirt, nothing. He wore work boots that looked fresh out of the box, and now that I was paying attention, his clothes seemed almost staged, like a costume of what someone thought a stranded motorist should look like. "Said no," the man repeated, his voice carrying an edge this time. He took a half step to his left, positioning himself between us and the car's open hood. That's when I caught it. Movement in my peripheral vision, off to the right where the tall prairie grass grew thick along the drainage ditch. It was subtle, just a shifting of shadows that didn't match the pattern created by our emergency lights. My EMT training kicked in, the same instinct that helped me spot barely breathing patients or notice when something in a scene didn't add up. I kept my expression neutral but let my hand drift toward my radio. The movement in the grass stopped the moment I looked directly at it, but I knew what I'd seen. Someone was out there, staying low, moving through the grass like they were trying to circle around behind us. Tom must have noticed my tension because his posture changed too, becoming more alert, more defensive. We'd worked together long enough to read each other without words. The man by the car noticed our shift immediately, his eyes darting between us and then, tellingly, toward the grass where I'd seen the movement. That quick glance told me everything. He knew someone was there, had probably been waiting for us to get closer to the vehicle before his partner made a move. My mind raced through our options. We were at least 30 minutes from any police backup, standing on a dark highway with someone who'd clearly staged a breakdown, and at least one accomplice hiding in the shadows. The ambulance was still running behind us, doors closed but unlocked, keys in the ignition. Standard protocol for quick departures. "Well, if you're sure you don't need help," Tom said slowly, already taking a step backward, "we'll be on our way." His voice stayed professional, but I heard the steel underneath. The man by the car didn't respond, just watched us with those reflecting eyes. I matched Tom's backward step, keeping my flashlight pointed down but ready. The person in the grass had gone completely still now, probably realizing we were onto them. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but running would mean turning our backs on whatever threat was out there. We needed to retreat carefully, deliberately, making it clear we weren't easy targets while not escalating the situation into something violent. Another step back, then another. The distance between us and the ambulance felt like miles. That's when everything went sideways. The person in the grass suddenly burst upward, sprinting toward us from an angle that would cut off our path to the ambulance. In the stark illumination of our emergency lights, I got a clear look. A woman, maybe early 20s, wearing all black, her face twisted with desperate determination. She was holding something in her right hand that caught the light. Tom reacted instantly, pivoting to face the new threat while shouting, "Move, move, move!" I didn't need the encouragement. We both broke into a run, but not toward the ambulance. That route was compromised. Instead, we sprinted across the highway toward the opposite shoulder, using the road's width to keep distance between us and both attackers. The man by the car had started moving too, abandoning his broken-down motorist act entirely. I could hear their footsteps pounding on the asphalt behind us as Tom and I reached the far side of the highway. Without discussing it, we both vaulted over the metal guardrail and plunged into the darkness beyond. The ground dropped away sharper than expected, and I tumbled down a steep embankment, branches tearing at my uniform, rocks bruising my ribs. Tom crashed through the underbrush somewhere to my left, cursing steadily. Behind us, I heard our pursuers reach the guardrail and stop, probably debating whether to follow us into the rough terrain. Their hesitation gave us precious seconds. We scrambled through the darkness at the bottom of the embankment, using a dry creek bed as cover. My radio had gotten knocked loose during the fall, dangling from its cord, but it still worked. Tom grabbed it while we moved, calling in our location and situation to dispatch. His voice stayed remarkably calm as he reported an attempted ambush on Highway 287, requesting immediate law enforcement backup. The dispatcher's response crackled through. Units were rolling, but the closest was still 25 minutes out. Above us, I could hear angry voices arguing. They couldn't see us in the darkness, but they knew we were calling for help. A car door slammed, then an engine roared to life. They were leaving, probably figuring their window of opportunity had closed. We stayed hidden in that creek bed for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, listening as the sedan's engine faded into the distance. Even after the silence returned, neither of us moved. When we finally climbed back up to the highway, staying low and careful, both vehicles were gone. The sedan and, more disturbingly, our ambulance. They'd taken it, along with all our equipment, medications, and everything inside. The reality of what almost happened hit me hard as we stood on that empty highway. Emergency lights no longer painting the darkness. Just two EMTs in torn uniforms waiting for backup that seemed to take forever to arrive. The police found our ambulance 3 hours later, abandoned at a rest stop 50 miles north, stripped of all narcotics and valuable medical equipment. They never caught the pair who set the trap, though similar incidents were reported across 3 states that summer. Fake breakdowns targeting emergency responders, medical supply trucks, even pharmacy delivery vehicles. Tom and I went back to work after a few days off, but something had changed. We'd always stopped to help before, no questions asked, but now we radioed our position to dispatch before approaching any breakdown. We kept our doors locked, engines running, and always watched for movement in the shadows. The part that haunts me most isn't the chase or the fear. It's knowing that somewhere out there, someone who genuinely needs help might wait a little longer because predators decided to exploit our instinct to assist. That's the real crime in all of this, turning compassion into caution, making us question whether the next person with their hood up is actually in distress or just another trap waiting to spring. Last November was probably the most stressful time in my teaching career. I was 26, teaching algebra and geometry at Westfield High, and parent-teacher conferences had me staying late almost every night that week. Living about 40 minutes outside town meant I usually took Highway 47 to get home, this old 2-lane bypass that cuts through nothing but cornfields and scattered farmhouses. Most nights I'd be the only car on that stretch for miles, just me and my podcasts and whatever leftovers I was planning to reheat for dinner. That particular Thursday, I'd been at school since 7 in the morning, and by the time I finally locked up my classroom at 9:30 p.m., all I wanted was my couch and maybe a glass of wine. The drive started normal enough. I remember passing the old Garrison farm with its broken windmill that always creaked in the wind. Then the abandoned gas station where teenagers supposedly went to drink on weekends. About 15 miles from home, right where the road dips down near Miller's Creek, I saw orange cones blocking half the lane ahead. A diamond-shaped construction sign blinked amber lights next to them, and standing in the middle was this guy in a reflective vest, holding one of those stop-slow paddles. I slowed down, confused because I hadn't heard about any road work planned for that area. The county usually sent out notices, and besides, who does construction at almost 10 at night? As I got closer, more details started registering in ways that made my skin prickle. The cones looked weirdly spaced, like someone had just tossed them out there without measuring. The construction sign, one of those portable ones on wheels, sat at an odd angle, and I couldn't see any actual message on it, just the flashing lights. But it was the man that really caught my attention. He wore the orange vest over what looked like regular street clothes, jeans and work boots, sure, but also this dark hoodie underneath that seemed wrong for a construction worker. His hard hat sat crooked, like he'd grabbed it last minute, and there were no trucks, no equipment, no torn-up asphalt, just him standing there in the middle of nowhere, waving that paddle for me to stop. I eased off the gas and came to a stop about 20 feet from where he stood, keeping my doors locked out of habit. He immediately started walking toward my car, not with the tired shuffle of someone who'd been directing traffic all day, but with this purposeful stride that made my chest tighten. He wasn't looking at the road or checking for other cars. His eyes were locked directly on me through my windshield. Under the harsh glare of my headlights, I could see his face clearly. Probably mid-30s with patchy stubble, and this expression that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't neutral either. He gestured for me to roll down my window, making this exaggerated rolling motion with his hand. And that's when I noticed he wasn't wearing any kind of ID badge or company logo, nothing that actual road workers always have. Against every instinct screaming at me, I cracked my window maybe 2 inches, just enough to hear what he wanted. "Road's closed ahead, miss," he said, but his voice had this strange quality to it, like he was reading from a script he'd just memorized. "Gotta detour you back the way you came. But first I need to see your license and registration for the report." The report? What report? I'd been through legitimate construction stops before, and nobody ever asked for my documents. My hand hovered over the gear shift as I watched him lean closer, and that's when I smelled it. Cigarettes mixed with something chemical, like paint thinner or gasoline. His eyes kept darting between my face and the inside of my car, like he was cataloging everything he could see. "I'll just turn around," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while my heart hammered against my ribs. But he stepped even closer, his hand now reaching for my door handle. No, I need those documents first. State requirement." His fingers wrapped around the handle and pulled, and thank God I'd locked it because the door rattled but didn't open. The pretense dropped from his face instantly, that fake concern replaced by something harder, meaner. He yanked the handle again, more violently this time, and slammed his other palm against my window. "Open the door," he shouted, all pretense of being a road worker gone. In my side mirror, I caught movement, another figure emerging from the darkness beyond the cones heading toward my car. My body moved before my brain caught up. I slammed the car into reverse, tires squealing against the asphalt as I backed up fast. The man jumped aside, shouting something I couldn't make out over the sound of my engine. In my rearview mirror, the second person, wearing similar gear, was running toward me now. I kept reversing, probably doing 30 in reverse down that dark road, swerving slightly as my back wheels hit the shoulder. The ditch on my right loomed dark and deep, and for one terrifying second, I felt the car tilt as the rear passenger tire slipped off the edge. I corrected hard, yanking the wheel left, gravel spraying as I fought to keep control. Behind me, or in front of me now since I was going backward, those two figures were still coming, their fake reflective vests catching my taillights like demonic eyes. When I'd reversed maybe 100 yards, I spun the wheel hard, executing the sloppiest three-point turn of my life on that narrow road. My headlights swept across the empty fields, then the tree line, then finally back to the road ahead, or what should have been behind me moments ago. As I shifted into drive and floored it, I caught one last glimpse of them in my mirrors. They'd given up the chase and stood by their fake construction setup, watching me flee. The one who'd approached my window was on his phone now, and something about that detail terrified me more than the attempted break-in. Was he calling others? Warning someone up ahead? I pushed my little Honda to 70 on that winding road, taking curves way too fast, my whole body shaking as adrenaline coursed through me. I didn't stop or slow down until I hit the main highway 10 miles later. Even then, I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see headlights racing up behind me. At the first gas station I found, one of those bright 24-hour places, I pulled in and parked right under the lights by the door. My legs felt like jelly when I got out, and I had to lean against my car for a minute just to steady myself. Inside, the clerk must have seen something in my face because he asked if I was okay. I told him what happened, and he immediately let me use the store phone to call 911. While I waited for the police, I noticed my hands had bloody scratches from gripping the steering wheel so hard, and there was a crack in my rearview mirror that hadn't been there before. Must have hit it with my hand during the escape without even realizing. 2 county deputies showed up within 15 minutes, and I led them back to the spot, following in my car while they went ahead. But when we got there, everything was gone. No cones, no flashing sign, no trace that anyone had been there at all. The deputies searched the area with flashlights, and one of them found fresh tire tracks in the soft shoulder where the sign had been, plus some cigarette butts that looked recently dropped. They took my statement, photographed the scene, and told me I'd done exactly the right thing by not stopping and not opening my door. The younger deputy mentioned they'd had similar reports over the past few months: fake construction sites, fake accident scenes, even fake police checkpoints, all on isolated roads, always at night. The investigation later revealed the construction equipment had been stolen from a Department of Transportation lot about 50 miles away. Security footage showed 2 men loading cones and signs into a pickup truck 3 nights before my encounter. The vests were taken from the same place, along with some other gear that made my stomach churn when I heard about it: rope, zip ties, and a crowbar. The detective assigned to my case said I was lucky. Another woman the previous month hadn't been so fortunate, though she'd managed to escape after they'd gotten her out of her car. She'd been too traumatized to give a good description, but what she could remember matched what I'd seen. They never caught the men, though the fake construction stop suddenly stopped after my report made the local news. I don't take Highway 47 anymore. I know that's letting them win in a way, but I just can't do it. I take the longer route through town now, adding 20 minutes to my commute but keeping to well-lit, populated areas. Sometimes when I'm driving at night and see legitimate roadwork ahead, I still feel that spike of panic, my foot hovering over the brake while I scan for escape routes. I installed a dash cam the week after it happened, and I keep pepper spray in my door pocket now. The school offered counseling, which helped, though I still have dreams sometimes where I'm backing down that dark road forever, the ditch getting closer while those men in their stolen vests keep coming. What haunts me most is thinking about their plan. What would have happened if I'd been too trusting, too tired, or too slow to react? The detective told me they'd probably been watching that road for weeks, learning the patterns, waiting for someone alone. Someone like me. The desert roads outside Flagstaff get eerily quiet after midnight, especially in early October when the tourist season winds down. I was 29, doing freelance graphic design from home, and had just spent the evening at my girlfriend Sarah's apartment on the north side of town. We'd been together about 8 months, and I'd gotten pretty familiar with the 40-minute drive between our places. That night, I left her apartment around 1 a.m., maybe a few minutes after. The temperature had dropped to that perfect Arizona autumn chill where you need a jacket but can still drive with the windows cracked. I remember feeling good, relaxed even, as I merged onto Highway 89A heading south. Sarah lived in one of those newer complexes near the university, while I rented a small house on the outskirts, closer to the national forest. The route I always took started with busy streets near campus, then gradually transitioned to darker, emptier roads as you got further from town. After about 15 minutes, you'd hit this stretch where the streetlights disappeared completely, and it was just you, your headlights, and the occasional pair of glowing eyes from some animal in the brush. I'd driven it so many times I could probably do it with my eyes closed, knew every curve and dip in the asphalt. That night started like any other late drive home. I had my usual energy drink in the cup holder, some indie rock playlist going softly through the speakers. The first 20 minutes were completely normal. Passed a few other cars leaving the bar district, saw a cop parked at his usual speed trap spot near the Walmart. But once I hit that darker stretch of 89A, where the road narrows and winds through the pines, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. Not unusual at first, except these were sitting way too close for comfort. High beams blazing straight into my mirrors. Couldn't even make out what kind of vehicle it was through the glare. At first I figured it was just some drunk idiot who didn't realize how close they were following. I tapped my brakes a couple times, the universal signal for back off, buddy. Nothing. If anything, they crept closer. I could feel that familiar annoyance rising in my chest. You know, that feeling when someone's being an aggressive driver and you just want to get home without any drama. So I sped up a bit, going maybe 5 over the limit, hoping they'd either pass me or fall back. But those headlights stayed glued to my bumper, matching my speed perfectly. That's when that little alarm bell in the back of my head started going off. The one that tells you something's not quite right about this situation. There's this Shell station about 5 miles down 89A that stays open 24 hours. I decided to pull in, partly because I could use some gas anyway, but mostly to see if this person would keep going. I put on my blinker way early, giving them plenty of warning, and took the exit nice and slow. The headlights followed. My chest tightened as I pulled up to the pump, and I watched in my side mirror as the vehicle, I could see now it was a black SUV, maybe a Tahoe or Suburban, rolled past the gas station entrance. For a second, I felt relief wash over me. Just my imagination, right? But then I saw their brake lights flare up about 50 yards past the station. They pulled into the abandoned lot of what used to be a tire shop, lights still on, engine still running. I sat there at the pump, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. The gas station was well lit, had cameras everywhere, and the clerk inside looked like he was still awake behind the counter. Safe enough. So I got out, started pumping gas while keeping one eye on that SUV sitting in the darkness across the road. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. No license plates, not even a temporary tag in the window, just bare mounting brackets where the plates should have been. Now, I'm not usually paranoid, but every true crime podcast I'd ever listened to started flooding back into my brain. Nothing good ever comes from vehicles with no plates following you at 1 in the morning. I finished pumping gas faster than I ever had in my life, practically threw the nozzle back on the hook and jumped back in my car. Before I even had my seatbelt on, those headlights across the road flicked back to high beams. They were waiting for me. My mouth went dry as I pulled out of the station, heading back onto 89A. Sure enough, within seconds, those bright lights were burning holes in my mirrors again. This time, though, they were even closer. I could make out the shape of the SUV better now. Definitely a Suburban black or dark blue. Windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. And they were riding my bumper so close that if I had to brake suddenly, they'd plow right into me. My phone was in the cup holder, and I grabbed it with one hand while trying to keep steady on the winding road. Thank God for voice commands. "Hey Siri, call 911. The call connected after what felt like forever, and I tried to keep my voice calm as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. Gave her my location, direction of travel, described the vehicle. She asked if I could see the driver or any passengers. I couldn't. Asked if they'd made any aggressive moves besides tailgating. Not yet. Then came the response that made my heart sink. "Sir, we don't have any units in that area right now. The closest patrol car is about 30 minutes out. Can you get to a populated area?" Populated area. Right. The nearest real civilization was still about 10 miles away. A strip of fast food places and big box stores near the I-40 interchange. Between here and there, nothing but pine trees, scattered houses set way back from the road, and a whole lot of darkness. The dispatcher stayed on the line, telling me to keep her updated, but I could hear the worry creeping into her voice too. I pushed the speedometer up to 70, then 75, taking curves faster than I should have on that narrow road. The SUV matched me mile for mile, never falling back more than a car length. At one point, the road straightened out for about a half mile and I floored it, hitting 85. My little Honda was shaking with the effort, but those headlights just grew brighter, closer, like they were toying with me. Then things got worse. We hit a section with a passing lane, and the SUV suddenly swerved into the left lane like they were going to pass. Finally, I thought, they're just some aggressive driver who wants to go faster. But instead of passing, they pulled up alongside me and matched my speed exactly. I risked a glance over, but all I could see was that dark-tinted window reflecting my own headlights back at me. We drove like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Two vehicles racing side by side down an empty highway at 1:30 in the morning. Then, without warning, they started drifting into my lane. Not fast, but steady, deliberate, forcing me toward the shoulder. I laid on the horn and yanked the wheel right, tires screaming as I hit the rumble strip. The SUV backed off just enough to let me recover, then immediately crowded me again. This sick game of cat and mouse continued for another mile, them pushing me toward the edge, me swerving and honking, them backing off just to do it again. The dispatcher was practically yelling through my phone speaker, asking what was happening, saying she was trying to get a unit redirected, but I knew help wasn't coming in time. These people, whoever they weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They wanted me off that road, probably into one of those dark pull-offs where nobody would see what happened next. That's when I saw salvation up ahead, the bright lights of a 24-hour Safeway at the first major intersection heading into town. The parking lot was huge, well lit, and most importantly, would definitely have security cameras covering every angle. I didn't use my blinker, didn't give any warning. At the last possible second, I yanked the wheel hard right and shot across 2 lanes, tires squealing as I took the turn way too fast. The SUV tried to follow but overshot the entrance, their heavier vehicle not able to make the sudden turn. I gunned it across the parking lot, probably doing 40 a minute past the cart return, and skidded to a stop right in front of the store's main entrance where all the lights were brightest. I sat there for a moment, engine running, watching my mirrors. The SUV had managed to turn around and was now sitting at the parking lot entrance, just idling there under the streetlight. Even from 100 yards away, I could feel them watching me, deciding what to do next. My whole body was trembling with adrenaline, and I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had gone white. The dispatcher was still on the line, and I told her where I was, described what had just happened. She said units were now about 15 minutes out, and to stay where I was, stay in the light, keep the doors locked. Those were the longest 15 minutes of my life. The SUV just sat there at the entrance, engine running, like some predator deciding if its prey was worth pursuing into the light. A few late-night shoppers walked past my car, giving me odd looks. I probably looked insane, sitting there wild-eyed and breathing hard. But I didn't care. I kept my eyes locked on that black SUV, phone in one hand, other hand ready to throw the car in gear if they made a move. Then, maybe 5 minutes before I heard the first sirens, the SUV's reverse lights came on. They backed up slowly, turned, and disappeared into the night. No rush, no panic. Just calmly drove away like they'd simply changed their mind about grocery shopping. The police showed up in force, 3 cars, lights flashing. I spent the next hour giving my statement, showing them my phone's GPS history to prove the route I'd taken, describing every detail I could remember about the SUV. The officers were professional, but I could tell they were taking this seriously. One of them mentioned they'd had similar reports recently, always late at night, always involving a dark SUV with no plates. They pulled the security footage from Safeway and the Shell station, said they'd canvass for more cameras along the route. But we all knew the chances of finding a black SUV with no identifying marks in a city full of similar vehicles was slim. The real chilling part came about 3 weeks later. I was scrolling through local news on my lunch break when I saw the headline, "Police arrest suspects in string of violent carjackings." The article described how a group had been using a black Suburban to follow victims from bars, stores, and restaurants, waiting until they were on isolated roads to strike. They'd box in the victim's car, force them to stop, then rob them at gunpoint. Sometimes worse. The photo showed the seized vehicle, same model, same blacked-out windows, same missing plates. 5 victims over 2 months, all attacked on quiet roads outside town. The detective I'd spoken with called me that afternoon, confirmed it was likely the same group that had followed me. Said the security footage from Safeway had probably saved me from becoming victim number 6. They'd gotten spooked by all the cameras and witnesses, decided I wasn't worth the risk. To this day, I still take the long way home from Sarah's place, the route that stays on well-lit main roads the whole way. And I still check my mirrors more than I should, especially when I see headlights that sit a little too close for comfort. Eight years of night shifts at the Grand View Inn taught me to notice things most people miss. The way shadows behave differently at 3 a.m., how silence can press against your eardrums like a warning, and when something disrupts the usual rhythm of midnight hours. At 44, I thought I'd seen every kind of late-night drama that could stumble through those automatic doors, but nothing prepared me for what happened on that cold Wednesday morning in February 2023. The hotel wasn't the fanciest place in town, but it gave me steady work, a parade of travelers, insomniacs, and folks running from troubles they couldn't quite name. After pulling a double shift covering for my coworker Jessica, who'd called in sick, I was beyond exhausted. My feet throbbed in those sensible black shoes, my lower back screamed from hours of standing, and all I wanted was to collapse into my own bed. The clock above the front desk showed 6:47 a.m. when I finally grabbed my purse and headed for the parking lot. The morning air hit me like a slap, crisp and unforgiving in that way February mornings have of reminding you winter isn't done with you yet. I pulled my burgundy coat tighter around my shoulders and fumbled for my car keys, already mentally calculating how long it would take to drive the 12 miles home to my apartment. Traffic would be light at this hour, mostly shift workers like me heading home while the rest of the world prepared for another day. My Honda Civic sat under one of the flickering parking lot lights, covered in a thin layer of frost that I'd have to scrape off before I could see clearly through the windshield. The heater in my car had been acting up lately, blowing cold air for the first 10 minutes before finally warming up, which meant I'd be shivering most of the way home. I started the engine and let it run while I worked on clearing the ice, the rhythmic scraping of the plastic tool against glass creating the only sound in the empty lot. The drive started like any other morning commute. Quiet streets, a few delivery trucks making early rounds, and the occasional jogger brave enough to face the cold. I'd taken this route so many times I could practically do it with my eyes closed. Down Maple Street, left on Industrial Boulevard, straight through downtown, then onto the highway that would take me to my neighborhood. The radio played some generic pop song that barely registered in my tired brain, and I found myself nodding along just to stay alert. About halfway home, I approached the intersection at 5th and Industrial, where a traffic light always seemed to catch me no matter what time I passed through. The light turned red just as I reached it, and I came to a stop behind a dark blue sedan that had pulled up moments before. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about the car. Maybe a 2018 or 2019 model, nothing fancy. Just another commuter trying to get somewhere. But as I sat there waiting for the light to change, something caught my attention that made my tired mind suddenly sharp and focused. The trunk wasn't completely closed. It hung open maybe 3 or 4 inches, creating a dark gap that seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision like a warning. Now, I've seen plenty of people driving around with trunks that won't latch properly, broken mechanisms, overloaded with groceries, or just forgetfulness. But this felt different somehow. The way it bounced slightly with each small movement of the car, like something inside was shifting around. I leaned forward in my seat, squinting through my windshield to get a better look, and that's when I saw it. Movement. Subtle, but definitely there. A pale shape that appeared briefly in that dark gap before disappearing again. My first thought was maybe they had a dog back there, but the movement seemed wrong for an animal. Too deliberate, too human-like. The traffic light seemed to take forever, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter, every instinct telling me to pay attention to what I was seeing. When the light finally turned green, the sedan pulled forward slowly, and I had to make a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of taking my usual right turn toward home, I followed the blue sedan straight through the intersection. Something deep in my gut told me this wasn't a coincidence or my imagination playing tricks after a long shift. The pale thing I'd glimpsed moved again, and this time I was certain. It looked like fingers, human fingers pressing against the inside of the trunk lid. My heart started hammering against my ribs as I maintained a careful distance behind the car, close enough to keep watching, but far enough back that the driver wouldn't notice me in their mirrors. The sedan drove at exactly the speed limit. Nothing suspicious about the way it handled turns or stopped at signs, which somehow made the whole situation more unsettling. Whoever was driving knew how to blend in, how to avoid drawing attention while transporting whatever or whoever was trapped in that trunk. I fumbled for my phone with one hand while keeping my eyes on the road, trying to get a clear view of the license plate, but the angle was wrong and my phone's camera couldn't focus properly through the windshield. We drove for about 6 blocks through a part of town I rarely visited, past closed storefronts and empty parking lots that looked different in the gray morning light. The sedan turned left onto Henderson Road, a street lined with older industrial buildings and warehouses that had seen better days. Most of the businesses here wouldn't open for hours, leaving the area virtually deserted except for us and a few scattered cars parked along the curbs. I started to feel exposed following so closely, worried the driver might notice my headlights in their rearview mirror, so I dropped back further and tried to memorize every detail I could about the vehicle. Dark blue, 4-door sedan, looked like a Nissan Altima based on the taillights, and there was a small dent in the rear bumper on the passenger side. The trunk continued to bounce slightly with that same rhythmic movement, and I caught another glimpse of what I was now convinced was a hand pushing desperately against the inside of the lid. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good, and I realized I was witnessing something that would haunt me forever if I didn't act. The sedan suddenly accelerated, taking a sharp right turn into what looked like an abandoned industrial complex. I hesitated for just a moment, watching the taillights disappear behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire, and by the time I decided to follow, they were gone. I pulled up to the entrance and saw a maze of concrete buildings, loading docks, and empty parking areas stretching back into shadows. There were multiple routes the car could have taken, and no way for me to know which direction they'd gone without driving deeper into the complex and risking a confrontation I wasn't prepared for. The smart thing would have been to call the police right then, but I had no concrete proof of what I'd seen, just a partially open trunk and movement that could have been anything. I sat there in my idling car for what felt like an eternity, staring at the industrial wasteland and feeling completely helpless. The morning sun was getting stronger now, casting long shadows between the buildings, and I knew I had to make a choice. Drive home and try to forget what I'd seen, or find a way to get help for whoever might be trapped in that trunk. I called 911 from the parking lot outside the industrial complex, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what I'd witnessed to the dispatcher. She was professional, but clearly skeptical. A hotel worker reporting suspicious movement in a car trunk wasn't exactly a priority emergency. I gave her the best description I could of the vehicle, the location where it had disappeared, and the license plate numbers I thought I'd seen, though I wasn't completely confident about the last 2 digits. The dispatcher said they'd send an officer to check the area, but it could be a while before anyone arrived. I drove home feeling sick to my stomach, knowing I'd done what I could, but wondering if it was enough. The rest of that morning passed in a blur of restless sleep filled with nightmares about pale hands pressing against dark spaces and muffled cries for help that no one could hear. When I woke up around 2 p.m., I immediately turned on the local news, searching for any reports that might confirm what I'd witnessed. Nothing, just the usual morning programming and weather updates. It wasn't until the next day that I saw the story that made my world tilt sideways. I was getting ready for another shift at the hotel when the evening news came on, and the anchor's words hit me like a physical blow. A 28-year-old woman named Angela Brooks had escaped from the trunk of a car after being kidnapped from a grocery store parking lot. She'd managed to kick out the back seat and crawl into the car's interior, while her captor was stopped at a gas station, then jumped out and ran for help. The police had arrested a 35-year-old man named Kevin Walsh at his apartment, and they'd recovered the vehicle, a dark blue 2018 Nissan Altima with a small dent in the rear bumper. The same car I'd followed, the same trunk I'd seen bouncing with desperate movement. Angela Brooks had been in there, fighting for her life, while I'd sat at that traffic light just a few feet away. The news report showed her photo, a pretty brunette with kind eyes who worked as a teacher at the elementary school, and I couldn't stop staring at her face, thinking about how close she'd come to disappearing forever. The police statement said Angela had been held for approximately 18 hours before managing to escape. That meant when I saw her at the traffic light, she'd been trapped in that trunk for most of the night, probably terrified and running out of hope that anyone would find her. The thought made me physically ill. I'd been right there, I'd seen the signs, and I'd called for help, but part of me wondered if I could have done more. Should I have followed the car into that industrial complex? Should I have gotten out and confronted the driver? The rational part of my brain knew that would have been dangerous and probably stupid, but the guilt gnawed at me anyway. According to the news report, Walsh had a history of assault charges and had been stalking Angela for weeks before the kidnapping. He'd planned it carefully, waiting for her to leave work late one evening and grabbing her in the dark parking lot behind the school. The fact that she'd escaped through her own resourcefulness and courage, not because of my phone call, both relieved and haunted me. I'd witnessed a crime in progress and managed to provide some information to police, but Angela Brooks had saved herself. 3 months have passed since that morning, and I still think about Angela Brooks every time I drive home from work. The police detective who called me back said my report had helped them establish a timeline and confirm details of Walsh's route, which strengthened their case against him. He's been sentenced to 15 years, and Angela has started a foundation to help other kidnapping survivors. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever stop replaying those few minutes at the traffic light, wondering what would have happened if I'd acted differently, or if the light had changed sooner. But mostly I've learned to trust my instincts in a way I never did before. Working nights at a hotel, you see people at their most vulnerable, and now I pay even closer attention to the details that don't quite fit. The way someone holds themselves, the fear in their eyes, the small signs that something is desperately wrong. I can't save everyone, but I'll never again ignore that feeling when something doesn't look right. Angela Brooks taught me that sometimes being a witness is enough, and sometimes the smallest act of noticing can make all the difference in someone's fight to survive. Looking back now, 3 years later, I still get that sick feeling in my gut when I see patrol cars in my rearview mirror. People always say you should trust law enforcement, that they're there to protect you. After what happened to me and my buddy Jake on that godforsaken stretch of highway in rural Montana, I'm not so sure anymore. At the time, I was 24, working construction during the day and taking night classes for my engineering degree. Jake and I had been friends since high school, and we'd planned this road trip to Denver for months. We were driving his beat-up Honda Civic, loaded with camping gear and enough energy drinks to power a small city. The plan was simple: drive straight through the night, catch a Broncos game, then spend a few days hiking around Rocky Mountain National Park before heading back to Minneapolis. It was around 2:30 a.m. on a Friday in March 2022, and we were somewhere between Billings and the Wyoming border. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of us, nothing but darkness and the occasional semi-truck rumbling past in the opposite direction. Jake had been driving for the past 4 hours while I dozed in the passenger seat, but the caffeine from our last gas station stop had me wide awake again. The radio was playing some late-night talk show about alien abductions, and we were half listening, half joking about how we'd probably be the perfect targets out here in the middle of nowhere. The landscape around us was completely barren. No houses, no businesses, just rolling hills covered in scrub brush and the kind of darkness that makes you feel like you're the only two people left on Earth. Jake mentioned how his speedometer had been acting up lately, sometimes showing he was going 10 miles faster than he actually was. That's when we saw the red and blue lights flashing behind us. Jake immediately started slowing down, checking his speed and muttering about how he'd been going maybe 5 over the limit tops. The patrol car stayed right behind us for what felt like forever, close enough that the headlights were flooding our entire cabin with harsh white light. When Jake finally pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, I remember feeling that familiar anxiety you get during any traffic stop, but nothing more than that. We figured it would be a quick interaction, maybe a warning, maybe a small ticket, and then we'd be back on our way to Denver. The officer took his time getting out of his vehicle, which I later learned was a common intimidation tactic. Through the side mirror, I watched him approach, and the first thing that struck me as odd was his uniform. It looked official enough, dark blue with all the right patches and badges, but something about the way it fit seemed off, like maybe it was a size too big for his frame. When he reached Jake's window, the officer leaned down with a flashlight so bright it was almost blinding. His face was partially hidden in the shadows, but I could make out sharp cheekbones and pale skin that looked like it hadn't seen much sun. He was probably in his 40s, with graying hair buzzed short and eyes that seemed to reflect the flashlight beam in an unsettling way. "License and registration," he said in a voice that was calm but somehow carried an edge of authority that felt excessive for a routine traffic stop. Jake handed over his documents without question, and I noticed the officer's badge read Deputy C. Hartwell, with some kind of county sheriff's department logo I didn't recognize. While he examined Jake's license, he kept sweeping that flashlight beam between the two of us, lingering on our faces longer than seemed necessary. "You boys been drinking tonight?" he asked, even though neither of us had touched a drop of alcohol since we'd started driving. The question felt like an accusation rather than standard procedure. Jake answered politely that we hadn't been drinking, explaining we were just trying to make good time to Denver. Deputy Hartwell studied the license for an uncomfortably long time, occasionally glancing up at Jake's face as if comparing it to the photo. Then he did something that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Instead of walking back to his patrol car to run the license like every cop I'd ever encountered, he just stood there tapping it against his palm. "I'm going to need you both to step out of the vehicle," he said, his tone shifting to something more commanding. "Routine sobriety check." Jake and I exchanged a quick glance, both of us knowing this wasn't routine at all. You don't conduct sobriety tests on the side of a busy highway in the middle of the night, especially when there's no indication of impairment. But when a cop tells you to get out of your car, you don't really have a choice. As we climbed out, I noticed his patrol car was an older model Crown Victoria, the kind that had been phased out by most departments years ago. The paint job looked fresh though, almost too fresh, like someone had recently repainted it to match official vehicles. "Actually," Deputy Hartwell said as we stood on the gravel shoulder, semi-trucks roaring past and creating wind gusts that nearly knocked us off balance, "this isn't a safe location for field sobriety testing. Too much traffic, too much noise." He gestured toward a dirt road that branched off about 50 yards ahead, barely visible in the darkness. "I'm going to need you to follow me down that side road to a more controlled environment." Every instinct I had was screaming that this was wrong. Cops don't move traffic stops to secondary locations unless there's a damn good reason, and they certainly don't do it without calling for backup, or at least radioing in their location. I wanted to speak up, to question his procedure, but Jake was already nodding and saying we'd follow him. The deputy walked back to his car with a stride that seemed too casual for someone conducting official police business, and I caught a glimpse of his profile in his headlights. There was something about his jawline and the way he carried himself that reminded me of someone trying too hard to look authoritative, like an actor playing a role he hadn't quite mastered. We got back in the Honda and followed his taillights as he led us down the narrow dirt road. The path was barely wide enough for one vehicle, with deep ditches on either side and overgrown brush that scraped against our windows. Jake was gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual, and I could tell he was starting to have the same doubts I was having. "This doesn't feel right, man," he finally said, voicing what we were both thinking. The deputy's car kicked up clouds of dust that made it hard to see, and the road seemed to wind deeper and deeper into what felt like absolute wilderness. After about 10 minutes of driving, we reached a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, completely isolated from the highway. The deputy parked his car at an angle that blocked our most direct route back to the main road, and when he got out this time, his whole demeanor had changed. The professional facade was gone, replaced by something that made my skin crawl. He approached our car with his hand resting on his service weapon, not threateningly, but in a way that made it clear he wanted us to notice it. "Both of you out now," he barked, and this time there was no pretense of politeness. As Jake and I climbed out of the car again, I noticed we were completely cut off from civilization. No cell phone signal, no lights from any buildings, nothing but the sound of wind through the trees and our own rapid breathing. Deputy Hartwell positioned himself so that his body was between us and our vehicle, effectively trapping us in the clearing. "Turn around, hands on the hood," he ordered, and when we hesitated for just a second, his voice turned sharp and angry. "I said turn around." We complied, placing our palms on the cold metal of Jake's Honda while the deputy moved behind us. I could hear him moving around, but instead of the typical sounds of a pat-down or field sobriety test, there were other noises, rustling fabric, metallic clicks, things that didn't belong in a routine traffic stop. The whole situation had crossed from uncomfortable into genuinely terrifying, and I realized we were in serious trouble. This wasn't a cop doing his job. This was something else entirely, something dangerous, and we were alone with him in the middle of nowhere with no way to call for help. What happened next still gives me nightmares. Instead of conducting any kind of sobriety test, Deputy Hartwell started asking us bizarre personal questions. Where we worked, if anyone knew our exact route, when we were expected to arrive in Denver. His voice had taken on an almost conversational tone, but underneath it was something predatory, like he was gathering information for reasons that had nothing to do with law enforcement. When Jake tried to turn around to face him, the deputy immediately shouted for him to keep his eyes forward and his hands visible. I could hear him pacing behind us, his boots crunching on the gravel, and at one point I swear I heard him talking to himself in a low mumble that I couldn't quite make out. The beam from his flashlight kept moving erratically, sometimes illuminating the trees around us, sometimes focusing on our backs, creating this disorienting light show that made everything feel surreal. Then he started talking about how many people go missing on this stretch of highway every year, how easy it would be for someone to just disappear without a trace. The way he said it wasn't like he was making casual conversation. It sounded like a threat. I was trying to figure out if we could make a run for it when I heard the sound of an approaching vehicle on the dirt road. At first, it was just a distant rumble, but it was definitely getting closer, and Deputy Hartwell heard it too, because he immediately stopped pacing and went silent. The headlights appeared through the trees, bouncing and swaying as whatever vehicle it was navigated the rough road toward our clearing. Hartwell's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The confident, threatening persona vanished and was replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "Stay exactly where you are," he hissed at us. But now his voice was tight with anxiety rather than authority. The approaching vehicle turned out to be a massive pickup truck, probably a Ford F-350, with a light bar on the roof that lit up the entire clearing like daylight. When it pulled into the open space, I could see it was driven by a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt who looked like a local rancher or farmer. He rolled down his window and called out in a friendly but curious voice, asking if everything was all right and if anyone needed help. Deputy Hartwell walked toward the pickup truck, and I could see him trying to regain his composure, straightening his uniform and adopting an official-sounding voice as he approached the driver. "Everything's under control here, sir," he said. But even from where Jake and I were standing, I could hear the strain in his voice. Just conducting a routine traffic stop. The rancher, I later learned his name was Bill Crawford, wasn't buying it. He'd lived in this area his whole life, and he knew that legitimate traffic stops don't happen down unmarked dirt roads in the middle of the night. "Which department you with, deputy?" Bill asked, and I could hear the skepticism in his tone. "I know most of the boys from the sheriff's office, and I don't recognize you." That's when things got really interesting. Hartwell started stammering about being new to the area, transferred from another county, but his story was falling apart under even basic questioning. Bill kept pressing him for details: which county he'd transferred from, who his supervisor was, why he'd moved the traffic stop to such an isolated location. With each question, Hartwell became more agitated and defensive. The confrontation between Bill and the fake deputy gave Jake and me the opening we'd been praying for. While Hartwell was distracted trying to maintain his cover story, we managed to catch each other's eye and communicate without words that we needed to move toward Bill's truck. We started backing away from our car slowly, keeping our movements small and deliberate so we wouldn't draw Hartwell's attention. Bill seemed to understand what was happening because he kept engaging the deputy in conversation, asking more pointed questions about proper procedure and jurisdiction. "You know, deputy," Bill said with the kind of calm authority that comes from years of dealing with people trying to pull one over on you, "I think I'm going to need to see some proper identification from you. Badge number, radio call sign, supervisor contact information." That's when Hartwell finally snapped. He spun around toward Jake and me, his hand moving toward his weapon, but Bill was ready for that too. The rancher had apparently called 911 while we were talking, because suddenly we could hear sirens in the distance, real sirens from actual law enforcement vehicles. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had been holding us in that clearing, and Hartwell's fake authority crumbled completely. What happened next was like watching someone's entire identity dissolve in real time. Deputy Hartwell, or whoever he really was, looked around frantically as the sirens grew louder, his eyes darting between us, Bill's truck, and the dirt road that led back to the highway. For a moment, I thought he might try to brazen it out, to maintain his impersonation until the real cops arrived, but something in his expression told me he knew the game was over. Without saying another word, he sprinted toward his patrol car, fumbling with his keys in a way that destroyed any remaining illusion of professional competence. The Crown Victoria's engine turned over with a rough cough, and he threw it into reverse, backing up so fast that he nearly clipped the side of Bill's pickup truck. As he spun the car around and headed for what must have been another exit from the clearing, one we hadn't seen in the darkness, his headlights swept across us one final time. In that brief moment of illumination, I got a clear look at his face through the windshield, and what I saw there wasn't anger or frustration, but pure terror. He was more afraid of being caught than we had been of him, which somehow made the whole experience even more chilling. The real sheriff's deputies arrived about 5 minutes later, 2 patrol cars with legitimate markings, and officers who actually followed proper procedure. They immediately separated Jake, Bill, and me to get our individual statements, and it was clear from their questions that they took the situation very seriously. The lead investigator, Sergeant Patricia Monroe, explained that impersonating a law enforcement officer is a felony, especially when it's used to isolate and threaten civilians. While we were giving our statements, other officers were examining the clearing for evidence: tire tracks, footprints, anything that might help identify our fake deputy. They found several items that Hartwell had apparently dropped in his haste to escape. A realistic-looking but completely fake badge, a police radio that turned out to be a children's toy modified to look authentic, and most disturbing of all, a roll of zip ties and a length of rope. Sergeant Monroe's expression grew darker as each piece of evidence was bagged, and she told us in no uncertain terms that we'd been in serious danger. The items suggested that Hartwell, if that was even his real name, had planned to do more than just intimidate us. The investigation that followed revealed just how elaborate and terrifying this whole operation had been. The Crown Victoria was a decommissioned police car that had been purchased at auction and illegally modified to look like an active duty vehicle. The uniform, badge, and other accessories were all high-quality replicas that would have fooled most people, especially in low light conditions. What really disturbed the investigators was that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. Someone had invested significant time and money into creating a convincing law enforcement persona, which suggested they'd done this before. Despite an extensive search of the area and a multi-state alert, they never found Hartwell or his fake patrol car. The license plates turned out to be stolen from a vehicle in another state, and the VIN number on the Crown Victoria had been professionally altered. 3 weeks after our encounter, a similar incident was reported in Idaho, but by the time authorities responded, the fake officer had vanished again. The FBI eventually took over the case, classifying it as part of a pattern of crimes involving law enforcement impersonation, but as far as I know, they never caught the guy. Looking back on that night, I realize how close Jake and I came to becoming statistics. If Bill Crawford hadn't driven down that dirt road when he did, if he hadn't been suspicious enough to question Hartwell's story, If he hadn't called for real backup, I don't want to think about how that night might have ended. The whole experience changed how I view interactions with law enforcement, not because I don't trust legitimate officers, but because I learned how easy it can be for someone with bad intentions to exploit that trust. I've since researched what citizens can do if they suspect they're being pulled over by a fake cop. Things like asking to see proper identification, requesting that the officer call for backup, or driving to a well-lit public area before stopping. The most important lesson I learned is that real police officers should never object to reasonable requests for verification of their identity, and they should never isolate you from witnesses or move you to secondary locations without proper justification. Jake and I made it to Denver eventually, about 12 hours later than planned, but we were alive and unharmed. Sometimes I still wonder what happened to other people who weren't as lucky as we were, who didn't have a Bill Crawford show up at exactly the right moment. That fake deputy is probably still out there somewhere, and that thought keeps me checking my rearview mirror a little more carefully than I used to. So this is going to sound completely insane, but I need to get this off my chest because it's been eating at me for weeks now. I'm a sophomore at State University, studying psychology, and I've always been the rational type who doesn't believe in ghost stories or paranormal nonsense. I live in a small apartment about 20 minutes from campus, and I work part-time at the campus library to help pay rent. Life was pretty normal and predictable until that night in late September 2021. I had just finished a study session at my friend Claire's place. She lives in this old farmhouse her grandmother left her about 15 miles outside town. We'd been cramming for our abnormal psychology midterm, going through case studies until our eyes were burning from staring at textbooks for 6 straight hours. Claire made us some coffee around 9 p.m., but by 11 I was completely fried and decided to head home. Claire had warned me about taking Route 47 back to town because there'd been construction work that week, but I was exhausted and just wanted to get home as fast as possible. Instead of taking the main highway that loops around the countryside, I decided to cut through Blackwood Road, this narrow dirt path that winds through about 8 miles of dense forest. I'd driven it a few times during the day, and it usually shaved off about 15 minutes from the trip. The road is barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass, with thick pine and oak trees pressing in on both sides like walls. During the day, it's actually kind of pretty, but at night, it feels like driving through a tunnel. My car is this old Toyota Corolla that my dad bought me when I started college. Reliable, but definitely showing its age with over 150,000 miles on it. The headlights aren't the brightest, so the forest around me was just a wall of impenetrable darkness, broken only by the occasional reflective road marker. About 4 miles into the woods, right where the road curves around this massive fallen log that's been there for years, my car started making this weird sputtering sound. The engine began to shake, and I could feel the whole vehicle losing power. I managed to coast to a stop right next to this old barbed wire fence that runs along the edge of someone's abandoned property. The headlights illuminated maybe 30 feet ahead, showing the gravel road disappearing into the trees and this rusty gate that was hanging open on broken hinges. I tried turning the key a few times, but the engine just made this grinding noise and refused to start. The silence that followed was so complete it actually hurt my ears. No cars, no wind, not even crickets. Just dead silence in the middle of nowhere with my phone showing 0 bars of service. I remember thinking how stupid I was for taking this shortcut, especially this late at night when nobody else would be coming through. That's when I saw him. Just at the very edge of my headlight beam, maybe 25 feet ahead and slightly to the right, there was definitely a person standing among the trees. At first I thought maybe it was just a shadow or a weirdly shaped branch, but the silhouette was unmistakably human, tall, wearing what looked like dark clothing and completely motionless. I squinted through the windshield, trying to get a better look, but the figure was right at that point where my headlights started to fade into darkness. He wasn't moving at all, just standing there like a statue. I honked my horn twice, thinking maybe it was someone who could help me, or at least point me toward a house with a landline. But the figure didn't react, didn't wave, didn't even shift position. The longer I stared, the more unsettled I became. Something about the way he was standing, perfectly still, facing my direction, made my skin crawl. I decided to try my phone again, holding it up toward the window and moving it around, desperately hoping to catch even one bar of signal. When I looked back up from my phone, the man was closer. Not by much, maybe 5 feet, but he was definitely closer than before. I hadn't heard any footsteps, no rustling of leaves, nothing. He just moved while I was distracted. Now I could make out more details. He was wearing what looked like a dark jacket or coat, and he seemed to be a pretty big guy, probably over 6 feet tall. His face was still hidden in the shadows, but I could see that he was definitely looking straight at me. I felt this weird chill run down my spine, the kind you get when you realize someone's been watching you without you knowing it. I tried the horn again, 3 long blasts this time, but he still didn't respond. Instead, he just kept standing there in that same unnaturally still pose. I started frantically trying to restart the car, pumping the gas pedal and turning the key over and over. The engine would turn but wouldn't catch, making these horrible grinding noises that echoed through the empty forest. After about 5 minutes of trying to get the car started, I glanced up again and nearly jumped out of my skin. The man was now only about 15 feet away, right at the strongest part of my headlight beam. I could see him clearly now. He was massive, probably 6'4" or taller, wearing this long dark coat that hung down past his knees. But here's the thing that really freaked me out. I still couldn't see his face. It wasn't just shadows anymore. It was like there was nothing there, just darkness where his face should be. He was standing at this weird angle, slightly sideways but with his head turned toward me, and his arms were hanging at his sides in this really unnatural way. I realized I'd been holding my breath and gasped for air, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The rational part of my brain was trying to come up with explanations. Maybe he was wearing a ski mask. Maybe the angle of the light was playing tricks on me. But every instinct in my body was screaming that something was very, very wrong. I decided to try a different approach and rolled down my window just a crack. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sounding way shakier than I wanted it to. "Can you help me? My car broke down." The words seemed to get swallowed up by the silence, and the man didn't respond at all. He just kept standing there, motionless as a scarecrow. I waited for what felt like forever, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, then tried again. "Hello? Are you okay?" Nothing, not even a nod or a gesture. It was like he couldn't hear me, or more disturbing, like he was choosing to ignore me completely. I rolled the window back up and tried my phone again, holding it against the windshield, against the side windows, even putting it on the dashboard. Still nothing. The screen showed that emergency calls only message, but even that wasn't working in this dead zone. I started going through my options in my head. I could try walking back the way I came, but that was 4 miles through pitch black forest. Or I could wait until morning and hope someone would drive by. That's when I made the mistake of looking away to check the time on my dashboard clock. It was 11:47 p.m. When I looked back up at the road, the man was gone, just completely vanished. I scanned the entire area my headlights covered, checked the sides of the road, even looked behind the fence posts, but there was no sign of him anywhere. For a split second, I felt this wave of relief, thinking maybe he'd just been a lost hiker who found his way back to wherever he was going. But then I realized how impossible that was. There's no way someone that size could have moved out of the light beam that quickly without me hearing something. The forest floor is covered with dried leaves and fallen branches. You can't take 2 steps without making noise. I sat there for a few minutes trying to process what had just happened, when I decided to try the car one more time. I turned the key, and miracle of miracles, the engine turned over and started purring like nothing had ever been wrong with it. I didn't question it. I just threw it in drive and started moving as fast as I dared on that narrow dirt road. I was probably doing about 40 miles per hour, which was way too fast for that kind of road, but I just wanted to get out of there. The headlights swept back and forth as I navigated the curves, illuminating the dense wall of trees on either side. I kept checking my rearview mirror obsessively, half expecting to see that dark figure materializing behind me. But there was nothing except the red glow of my taillights disappearing into the darkness. About a mile down the road, I started to feel a little calmer. Maybe it really had just been some confused person. Maybe someone who was drunk or on drugs and wandering around lost. People do stupid things all the time, right? I was almost convinced I'd overreacted when I glanced in the rearview mirror again and saw movement. Not the man, something else. It looked like a shape, darker than the surrounding darkness, moving between the trees parallel to the road. It was keeping pace with my car, weaving between the trunks like it was running alongside me. My foot instinctively pressed harder on the gas pedal. The shape in the mirror was getting bigger, and I realized with growing horror that whatever was back there was gaining on me. I pushed the car up to 50, then 55, taking the curves at dangerous speeds that made my tires squeal against the gravel. But no matter how fast I went, that dark mass kept pace, moving through the forest with an unnatural fluidity that made my stomach churn. It wasn't running like a person or even like an animal. It was flowing, like liquid shadow poured between the trees. I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white, and I could hear myself breathing in these short, panicked gasps. The worst part was that I couldn't tell what it was. Every time I tried to focus on it in the mirror, it seemed to shift and change, like it was made of smoke or fog. But fog doesn't move with purpose, and this thing was definitely following me. I started praying to whatever God might be listening that I'd reach the main road before whatever was back there caught up to me. Just when I thought I couldn't drive any faster without losing control completely, I saw the blessed sight of streetlights ahead. The main road was maybe 200 yards away, and I could even see the occasional car passing by. Real people, real traffic, real civilization. I gunned it for that final stretch, not caring if I wrecked the car as long as I got out of those woods. As soon as my tires hit the paved road and I was under those bright streetlights, I slammed on the brakes and sat there shaking for about 10 minutes. When I finally worked up the courage to check the rearview mirror, there was nothing there, just empty road stretching back into the darkness. I drove home in a daze, keeping to well-lit streets and checking every mirror obsessively. When I finally got to my apartment, I sat in the parking lot with the engine running for another 20 minutes, making sure nothing had followed me. I never took that shortcut again, and to this day I have no idea what I encountered in those woods. But I'll tell you one thing. Whenever I drive past the entrance to Blackwood Road now, I always make sure my doors are locked and I don't slow down until I'm miles away. "15 years running my own garage in Phoenix, and I thought I'd seen everything. Car breakdowns, engine failures, transmission disasters, you name it, I've fixed it. People always ask me how I got into the mechanic business, and honestly, it started when I was 12 and my dad's pickup died in our driveway. Spent 3 days with him under that hood, learning how every component worked together, and I was hooked. Now at 43, I can diagnose most problems just by listening to how an engine sounds, or feeling how a steering wheel vibrates. It's become second nature, this ability to sense when something mechanical isn't right. What I never expected was that same instinct would kick in about people, not just machines. The night I'm about to tell you about happened in late April 2024, and it still makes me check my rearview mirror more often than I used to. If you're the type who stops to help strangers on the highway, you might want to pay attention to this story. That particular Monday had been one of those marathon workdays that every shop owner knows too well. Started before sunrise with a busted radiator on a delivery truck, then spent most of the afternoon wrestling with a stubborn timing belt that refused to cooperate. By evening, I was covered in grease, and my back was screaming from being hunched over engine bays all day. But my cousin Bobby had been begging me for weeks to help him rebuild the transmission in his '89 Mustang, and Monday was the only free night I had. The plan was simple. Drive up to his place near Henderson, Nevada. Knock out the transmission work in a few hours. Maybe grab some beers and catch up on family gossip. Should have been home by midnight easy. But anyone who's ever worked on classic cars knows that nothing ever goes according to plan. What was supposed to be a quick transmission replacement turned into a complete overhaul when we discovered the flywheel was warped and half the bolts were stripped. By the time we finally got that Mustang running properly, it was pushing 1:30 in the morning, and I was dead tired. Smart move would have been to crash on Bobby's couch and make the drive home in daylight. But I had appointments starting at 7 a.m. and couldn't afford to cancel again. Mrs. Patterson's Subaru had been making this awful grinding noise for weeks, and she'd already rescheduled twice because of my busy schedule. So I loaded up my tools, filled my thermos with the strongest coffee Bobby had, and headed out into the desert darkness for the long drive back to Arizona. The temperature had dropped into the 50s, perfect driving weather, and my F-150 was running like a dream. Radio was picking up some classic rock station out of Vegas, playing old Eagles and Fleetwood Mac songs that made the miles pass easier. I'd made this drive between Phoenix and Henderson probably 50 times over the years, knew every truck stop and rest area along the way. Route 93 cuts through some of the most desolate country you'll ever see, especially the stretch between Boulder City and Kingman. During the day, you've got sweeping views of desert mountains and the occasional Joshua tree, but at night it's just empty blackness on both sides of the highway. Most of the traffic at that hour consists of long-haul truckers making their overnight runs, plus the occasional shift worker heading home from the casinos. I'd been driving for about 40 minutes when I started getting that weird feeling you get when you're completely alone in the middle of nowhere, like you're the only person left in the world. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, engine temperature was perfect, and the coffee was keeping me alert despite the late hour. Everything was routine and peaceful until I crested a small hill and saw those orange hazard lights blinking in the distance. Even from a mile away, I could tell it was a small car pulled over on the right shoulder, and as I got closer, I could make out 2 figures standing beside it. As my headlights swept across the scene, I could see it was a dark blue or black hatchback, maybe a Honda Civic or Toyota Corolla from the early 2000s. The car was positioned properly on the shoulder, hazards blinking steadily, nothing obviously wrong with how it was parked. But the 2 men standing next to it, that's where things started feeling strange. They were both waving at me, not just casual, "Hey, can you help" waves, but frantic arm movements like they were trying to stop a runaway train. The guy closest to the road was tall and lanky, wearing what looked like a dark hoodie, while his companion was shorter and stockier, dressed in jeans and a light-colored shirt. What struck me as odd was how they were positioned, both of them standing in front of the car, instead of one staying back by the driver's door like most people do when they're genuinely broken down. Their body language seemed too animated, too desperate for what should have been a routine car trouble situation. I've stopped for hundreds of stranded motorists over the years, and usually people look embarrassed or frustrated, not like they're in some kind of panic. My truck started slowing down automatically. 20 years of helping people will do that to you. But something deep in my gut was screaming at me to keep going. The closer I got, the more wrong everything appeared. These guys weren't looking at their car or checking under the hood or doing any of the things you'd expect from people with actual car trouble. Instead, they were completely focused on me, tracking my approach with an intensity that made the hair on my neck stand up. The tall one had positioned himself right at the edge of the white line, way too close to traffic for someone who was genuinely worried about their safety. His companion was bouncing on his feet like he was amped up on something, hands shoved deep in his pockets in a way that looked unnatural. As I passed under a highway light about 200 yards out, I caught a glimpse of their faces, and neither one looked distressed or worried. They looked excited, almost predatory. That's when I made the decision that probably saved my life. Instead of pulling over, I eased off the brake and maintained my speed, keeping my eyes straight ahead as I passed them. In my peripheral vision, I could see both men step toward the road as my truck approached, the tall one actually taking a few steps into the travel lane like he was going to force me to stop. The shorter guy pulled his hands out of his pockets and started gesturing more aggressively, shouting something I couldn't hear over my engine noise. As I drove past, I caught a clear look at their expressions in my side mirror, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. These weren't the faces of people grateful for potential help, or disappointed that I didn't stop. They looked angry, really angry, like I'd personally insulted them by not falling for whatever trap they'd set up. The tall one actually flipped me off as I continued down the highway, while his friend kicked at the gravel on the shoulder. I've been in some sketchy situations before, but I'd never seen that kind of reaction from people who genuinely needed assistance. Real stranded motorists might be frustrated if you can't stop, but they don't get hostile about it. For the next few miles, I kept checking my mirrors obsessively, but the highway behind me remained dark and empty. My heart was pounding harder than it should have been, and I realized I was gripping the steering wheel way tighter than necessary. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe those guys really did need help and were just frustrated by my lack of trust. But every instinct I had was telling me I'd made the right call. I cranked up the radio to distract myself, some late-night DJ playing Lynyrd Skynyrd, and tried to focus on the road ahead. The next major town was still about 60 miles away, and I was looking forward to seeing some lights and maybe another vehicle or two. That's when I noticed something in my rearview mirror that made my chest tighten. A pair of headlights had appeared in the distance, moving fast and gaining ground quickly. At first, I told myself it was probably just a trucker making good time, but as the lights got closer, I could tell it was a smaller vehicle, definitely not an 18-wheeler. The car behind me was closing the distance at a speed that had to be pushing 90 miles per hour, way faster than anyone should be driving on that stretch of highway at night. As it got closer, I could make out the shape of a compact car, and my stomach started doing flips when I realized it looked exactly like the hatchback I'd passed a few minutes earlier. The headlights were getting bigger in my mirror, and whoever was driving wasn't showing any signs of slowing down or moving to the left lane to pass. Instead, they were coming up directly behind me, getting closer and closer until I could see the outline of their front bumper in my mirror. When they were maybe 20 feet off my rear bumper, they suddenly swerved into the left lane, and as they pulled alongside my truck, I got a clear view through their passenger window. It was them, the same two men from the breakdown scene, and they were staring directly at me with expressions that made my skin crawl. The passenger, the shorter guy, was pointing at me and saying something to his driver, while the tall one behind the wheel had this crazy look on his face. They stayed beside me for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, matching my speed exactly and just staring. Then, without any warning, the driver yanked the wheel hard to the right, trying to force me off the road. I had to swerve onto the shoulder to avoid getting sideswiped, gravel crunching under my tires and dust kicking up behind me. My truck fishtailed slightly before I got control back and merged back onto the asphalt. The hatchback had pulled ahead about 50 yards, but instead of continuing on down the highway like normal people would, they hit their brakes and started slowing down, obviously waiting for me to catch up so they could try something else. That's when I knew for certain that these weren't stranded motorists who'd gotten angry about my failure to help. These were dangerous people who had been using the fake breakdown as bait to lure someone into stopping. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. If I had pulled over to help them, I probably wouldn't be driving home right now. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers and dialed 911. The 911 operator answered on the second ring, her voice calm and professional despite the late hour. 911, what's your emergency? I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation, telling her about the fake breakdown, the aggressive pursuit, and the attempt to force me off the road. She asked for my location, and I rattled off the mile marker I'd just passed, explaining that I was northbound on Route 93, about 30 miles south of Kingman. Meanwhile, the hatchback ahead of me was still playing games, speeding up and slowing down, weaving between lanes like they were trying to decide their next move. The operator asked me to describe the vehicle and the occupants, which I did in as much detail as I could manage, while keeping one eye on the road and one on the car ahead of me. She told me to stay on the line and keep her updated on what was happening, and that she was dispatching units to intercept. The nearest patrol car was about 15 minutes away, but she assured me they were en route with lights and sirens. For the next few minutes, it turned into this twisted game of cat and mouse on the empty highway. The men in the hatchback would speed up to about 80 miles per hour, putting distance between us, then suddenly brake and swerve back and forth across both lanes, forcing me to slow down and stay behind them. Every time I tried to pass them in the left lane, they'd block me, matching my speed and position perfectly. When I dropped back and tried to maintain distance, they'd slow down to 40 miles per hour, clearly trying to keep me trapped in their little game. The 911 operator stayed on the line the entire time, taking notes as I provided a running commentary of their behavior. At one point, they pulled a really dangerous move, slamming on their brakes in front of me so hard that I had to hit my own brakes and swerve partially onto the shoulder again to avoid rear-ending them. The operator told me she was updating the responding officers with our current location, and that help was getting closer. I could hear the tension in her voice too, even though she was trying to stay professional and calm. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, I saw flashing red and blue lights appear in the distance ahead of us. The patrol car was coming from the opposite direction, and I watched as it crossed the median and fell in behind the hatchback. The moment those police lights became visible, the whole dynamic changed completely. The two men who had been terrorizing me for the past 20 minutes suddenly became model citizens, pulling over to the right shoulder and putting on their hazard lights like they were having legitimate car trouble. But it was too late. The 911 operator had already given the officers a full description of their vehicle and their behavior. Plus, my location updates had created a clear trail of their aggressive driving. I watched in my rearview mirror as the patrol car pulled up behind them with lights flashing, and a second police unit arrived within minutes to assist. The operator told me to pull over about a quarter mile ahead and wait for an officer to take my statement. As I sat there in my truck, engine running and emergency lights on, I could see the two men being handcuffed and placed in separate patrol cars. Later, the officer who took my statement told me that both men were armed with knives, and their vehicle had been reported stolen from a gas station in Henderson just 3 hours earlier. He said I was lucky to have trusted my instincts and not stopped to help them,